You are listening to That's What I Call Marketing with your host, Conor Byrne.
I'm so thrilled to have people support That's What I Call Marketing. And today's episode is being supported by CPL Marketing Recruitment. Now, the marketing team at CPL is an experienced team of specialist recruiters focused on placing marketing and digital professionals with clients across permanent, temporary, and contract roles. They have 25 years of experience recruiting and marketing, and they have a mission to thoroughly understand clients' challenges and match them with candidates who meet their needs and embody their culture. And we all know when you're hiring, having someone who's a partner that really understands your needs makes the world of difference, and they are your trusted partner. CPL are going to help you attract, engage, and retain the finest talent today and in the future. So if you are looking to hire in marketing, contact marketing.recruitment@cpl.ie and find out how they are going to be able to help you with your talent challenges. Thanks so much to CPL Marketing Recruitment for supporting today's episode of That's What I Call Marketing.
You know, and this may be a dirty word on a marketing podcast. So I always say to people, look, advertising is a weak force, right?
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, if you are enjoying the episodes of That's What I Call Marketing, and you can do us one small favor to rate or review the episode, subscribe wherever you are listening or watching. It is incredibly helpful to us in terms of building this amazing audience. You heard there in the opening from Professor Koen Pauwels. He is a distinguished professor of marketing at Northeastern University in Boston, a marketing expert with a rich academic and industry background. And today we discuss consumer behavior, challenges of global branding, impactful marketing strategies, and the importance of understanding the past to navigate modern marketing complexities. Let's get right into it. Professor Koen Pauwels, did I do that okay? I mean, I did practice beforehand with you, but thanks a million for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing. It's great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
No problem. And you're just starting your day, so I appreciate it's reasonably early for you. For people who may not know you, maybe just a very brief introduction.
So yes, as you can tell from my unpronounceable name, I'm originally from Belgium. I came to the States in 1997 for my PhD in marketing at UCLA. So I was right there in Southern California when the first internet boom hit, right? And then also with the first crash. So that was just very exciting to me. Then 2001, I graduated and I joined the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. So I caught it with people like Kevin Keller there and Scott Neslin. In 2009, I jumped over the pond and I joined a startup university in Istanbul for 8 years. And then in 2017, we came back to New England, but then a bigger city. So right now I'm in Boston, Northeastern University, and I'm professor of marketing and also the associate research dean here.
Am I right in saying you started out in engineering?
Yeah, very much so. So yeah, very, very classical training, Latin sciences in my high school, and then commercial engineering, as they call it in Belgium. It's some weird combination between economics and engineering. I think the engineering part is mostly that we know how to brew beer and how all gets refined. These are the most important operations research things I know from that one. But then I discovered marketing actually when I was in my third year. So I had an Erasmus exchange in Galway, Ireland.
Oh.
And my first exposure to marketing was by this fantastic Irish dude who had been in practice for 25 or 30 years. So he just, thought it very interesting. Of course, in Ireland, it's reading for a degree. So I had to choose a term project. And I chose reference prices. And so it just fascinated me. It combined psychology and sociology and everything we know about human sciences with economics. And so that was just intellectually very interesting to me and has kind of motivated me throughout my career.
Amazing. That's look, listen, sure, Ireland is the bedrock of of world marketing.
Yeah. And yes, I just love the whole educational system, right? It was very much like in Belgium, just I think in most of the world, you're supposed to, in the undergraduate, kind of be able to reproduce what the professor tells you and maybe apply to new situations. Whereas I remember the grading system was specifically a shock to Americans who were used to straight A's, because the only way to get more than 70% was to know more than the professor about the question. And so you were instead incentivized to go very deep in things that were really interesting to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty unique for an undergraduate degree. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. Just to touch on briefly the move to Istanbul. Again, I find that it was a fascinating part of your story that I heard about. Like kind of how did that come about and what was intriguing to you about that?
So how it came about was very simple, right? So I met my wife, who is from Turkey, in our PhD in UCLA, and she always hated the States. I mean, I kid you not. She was like, "This is the worst country in the world, professionally as well as personally. I want to go back." And so I held that out for about 10 years or so. But then, so after the kids were born, and we had this great opportunity. So a startup university in Istanbul, with really, I would say, the ambition to be the best university, let's say, between Germany and India, right? Combined with this kind of third generation, as they call it. So all of our business school faculty was very practical, lots of consultancy engagements. We were kind of the gateway for foreign companies trying to get into Turkey and Turkish companies going abroad. All of our engineering faculty had patents and so forth. So it was just a very exciting time also to be in Istanbul at the moment. And then I would say, ironically, it's actually my wife who said after a few years, "No, this is going the wrong way. I want to go back to the States." So now we're back, but she's happy. So that was the thing. I do say, though, I mean, I learned so many things. I think one of the key things I learned is consumer behavior, right? What we love as marketers. I always say the mortal sin of any marketer is thinking that every customer is like him or her.
Yeah.
So for me, I grew up in a very stable environment, Belgium. So I always say I left Belgium because it was too boring, and Turkey because it was too exciting. And by which I mean, like, my parents are primary school teachers and they never made much money, but they save 20-25% of their income, and it's a stable environment. So your money accumulates and they're very well off now. Whereas in Turkey, you have this environment where the political and the economic situation could change, every 2 years. And so this whole idea also in business and marketing, that you build a brand for the long term and then maybe in 5 to 10 years you reap the rewards, is completely alien to a culture who's like, well, I just have to make it through this year. And you also see that in consumers and financial decision making, right? So before, I think, 2002, there was just no mortgage industry in Turkey. So
Right.
the only house you could buy is the house you could afford fully right now. There's no such thing as, and so with mortgage coming into the country, also when we moved, you had this big change happening. So it got me a lot of kind of respect and understanding for, I would say, consumers and businesses that grew up in an environment that's just a lot less stable than the ones I lived in before.
It's so interesting because like when you think about, and we get on to kind of maybe some of your beliefs, but like when you think about global brands, and it's a question I talk to a lot of people about, in organizations who are like, right, we've done really well in our home market, we need to think about how we enter new markets.
Yeah. It's really tough. I mean, my first kind of really, I would say, international marketing paper that I'm very, very happy about. It was my first ever publication in the best international journal in marketing, IGRM, of which I'm becoming the editor, by the way, in 2 months. But I was basically comparing actually two British brands of deodorants in the UK and Brazil. And so, truth be told, we only had the UK and Brazil, right? So it's not that we could generalize across all mature and all emerging markets. But I done that later. And what I found fascinating is that in the US and UK and in Western markets, people talk a lot about, making your brand sensual and mysterious, right? This was the brand love concept. And so you see, indeed, for low budget items, that works great. I remember, so in Istanbul, I was good friends with the global head of Dove, and she was presented to the student Dove Man. And this is like years ago,
Mm.
right? This is, I think, 2015 or something. And she got this commercial, and all the men in the audience like, well, wait a minute, the commercial just shows it's relevant to you as a man, right? They targeted kind of a busy father and everything, but you never told us the qualities, the ingredient, the price. And she's like, we don't have to, because men don't think. They just buy it if it's relevant to them, because you try it out. If we advertise for women, then we have to also talk about how it's better than the competition and all of that. And we had this whole discussion about whether that was just deodorant or generalizes to other fields. But I thought it was fascinating. And so this brand love thing really works if you have kind of a low budget outer thing and people can easily try it, right? And there's not much brand differentiation. Whereas in Brazil, we found that no, so it's very easy in Brazil to reach people with advertising versus the UK because they don't block it out as much.
Right.
But it's way harder to get them to consider your brand. And the reason is that they first ask their family and friends, hey, this is a new brand, a new product. Is this good? What would other people think and feel about me if they saw me buying or using it? And then specifically brand love was way more important as a driver of sales in the UK versus Brazil.
Right.
And then later on I looked at this issue in like India, China, and so forth. And I think it has to do with kind of the, so many changes happening in your childhood versus stability that you don't, people always say in China, people don't buy Lenovo, for instance, because they love the brand. They buy it because it's stable, it's secure, everybody kind of understands it, and nobody will think less of you when
Yeah.
you buy Lenovo. And so that when these brands that grew up, let's say in China, India, or Turkey, try to get it hit it big in the US or UK market, they suddenly have to think about adding these emotional components. So I think this is a kind of a key difference that, in my research likely comes from our experiences in our childhood, and it has to do something with stability of the country.
That's amazing. So, I'll be very honest, and I've worked across a lot of different countries: India, Australia, Brazil. But actually, well, maybe in Brazil, actually, now that I think about it, probably the stability of the country did come in, and Mexico probably did as well. But like, it's a very interesting dynamic that never was articulated well.
Okay, yeah.
Now, you've talked a bit about kind of some of maybe the things I wanted to touch on, but like, and it's quite a broad question to ask a professor of marketing. But what are kind of some of your marketing beliefs, like things that you hold firm on? And that's a very broad question, but I'd love to kind of get your take.
Oh, okay. And so it's always fascinating to me that very often our beliefs, they don't come, top of mind unless somebody challenges you on it, right? So because I'm going to visit the Ehrenberg Bars Institute. I'm coming to Australia finally after 15 years.
Oh, wow.
I'm visiting next month. And so I'm going also over to Adelaide. And so one of the things that I really kind of credit Byron Sharp and Jenny and their team for is challenging a belief that I strongly hold, which is that you can change people's behavior by changing their attitudes. And I just want to contrast that with the behavioralist approach that Byron has, right? That they're like, hey, asking people about their beliefs is completely useless. Because if I ask you how much do you like Coke and Pepsi and ask you 120 questions, you will just think back in recent memory or
Yeah.
maybe to your pantry or what you bought. And if you have not bought Pepsi for 12 years, you will say, well, it absolutely sucks and everything. It's kind of justifying your behavior and vice versa, right? So in his mind, you change people's behavior first, and then they update their attitudes. And I have one fun example that I've shown in my research that can be the case. But I have the very strong belief that in lots of categories, including the slightly more involvement one, you first have to change people's thoughts and feelings, and only then they will buy your product. And I typically make the example, suppose, that I come out with the Pawels chewing gum or I come out with the Pawels bag. So if I come out with the chewing gum, right, and I get myself distributed physical availability, right, in the right supermarkets where you go and I'm right on the counter when you check out, you may just pick me up and
Yeah.
like, hey, let's try this one. So yes, I could try to get my chewing gum in your hands, and then maybe then you will buy it and you will like it and so forth. But if I try to convince you to put your money with my Powell's Bank, I have a lot of convincing and education to do. I have to probably touch you, right, as we say in marketing now, several times on several channels, preferably offline and online. And I have to basically establish what Kevin Keller calls points of difference and points of parity in there. So first of all, that you understand that I'm a bank and that I'm a serious player, so you should consider me.
Yeah.
And then among the banks, you consider that you should choose me.
Yeah.
And so I would say that's my other strong belief, right? So I got from Kevin Keller this points of parity, points of difference. And this was very strong in the first internet.com boom. So you had all of these, 30-second Super Bowl commercials in the state that cost millions of dollars. And at the end, you were like, yes, this is an e-commerce company, but what category are they even in? So specifically, if you're new, if people don't know you yet, you have to kind of build up the belief that you should be considered, that they're worth your time. And then you can start talking about, hey, you should buy me because I'm better or faster or cheaper. And so I think a strong belief of mine is that specifically for categories that are not very cheap and like chewing gum,
Yeah.
you actually, for a new product or brand, have to change people's attitudes before they really change their behavior.
And do you do that by being distinctive? Like, because obviously they talk about distinctiveness. Is distinctiveness one of the ways of doing
Yeah.
that?
Definitely it's the case, right? And so if you think, and it's really kind of funny to think, I think the other belief I have in marketing, and I think this is less controversial, you should focus on your weak link, whether we're talking purchase funnel or distinctiveness and differentiation, right? So if you have a really good product, suppose you are better, right? Suppose you are the best marketing consultant in the world. So what and for a good price. So what do you do now? You better focus on distinctiveness. You better focus on consistently putting your brand image out there, coming to mind when companies or policymakers want to hire a marketing
Yeah.
consultant. However, if you are relatively distinctive, but people have lost interest in you, and they're like, yeah, you used to be great, maybe 10, 20 years ago, but you have really lost your quality positioning. You have lost what differentiates you, right? What makes you unique and better than the competition for some people. Then you better focus on restoring that. And so I find this always I always say it's not because something is hard to achieve, you shouldn't try it, right? Au contraire, if something is hard to achieve. So I think what Ehrenberg Boss Institute has shown to some research is that it's very hard to differentiate yourself.
Yeah.
And I completely give them that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Specifically in a sustainable way. But that doesn't mean that, first of all, you shouldn't try it, because the benefits are simply enormous, huge price premiums and so forth, right? And so the same, and so I think differentiation is very hard to maintain and to conceptualize and to really kind of do. And then I would say distinctiveness is intellectually extremely plain and boring. In practice, it's very hard. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why marketing academics almost never talk about distinctiveness. They're like, of course, as McDonald's, you should put the golden arch everywhere. What they often don't know in their ivory tower is that it's very hard in practice. So when you're working in a company and every 3 years you have a new
Yeah.
CMO who completely wants to change everything, or you have all of these new stuff coming in practice, it's very hard to keep your company focused on being distinctive. And so I do believe that both of them are very important, but that if you have limited resources, you should focus on your weakest link among the two.
Well, and that's a really good point. And I often think about people who would listen to this and, will be maybe in smaller brands or smaller companies or whatever, and don't have the budgets of McDonald's.
Yeah.
Although I did read something recently where I can't remember who said it, but it was like, they were talking to somebody in McDonald's. McDonald's were like, but we don't even have the budgets. And they were like, but I thought, or it was Thomas Barta. Thomas Barta was like, but hang on, you're McDonald's. I thought you had the McDonald's budgets.
No, everybody has to be lean, no matter how rich the company is that you're working for.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
yeah. And there's always the importance of the word "and." It depends, also, right? You know what I mean? It's all contextual, isn't it? As a professor, like, how does that sit with you? In terms of maybe there isn't always a hard and fast answer. Does that make you uncomfortable?
Well, I was, not at all. So I was, just yesterday in a discussion with somebody, I made the claim that marketing is way harder than rocket science. I always say to my students, hey, this is not rocket science, it's way harder. And of course, my argument is that we are trying to predict and influence human behavior. So if we put something out there in marketing, first of all, we have to convince people within our company, right? Which may be very special. But then we also have to kind of somehow predict how consumers are going to react, competitors, sometimes even legislators. And so we all know that in the social sciences, it's just harder to make kind of fast laws that are like the gravity constant and so forth. And I think that makes it also very interesting. And so it does mean that we have to be much more careful for generalizing. And we have to think more under which conditions does this apply and does this not apply,
Yeah.
right? So if all of your research is fast-moving consumer goods, relatively low involvement in mature markets, then yeah, maybe it's different for small brands or in emerging markets, and you should kind of, I think, really think about this pretty carefully. I'll give you a typical example of overgeneralization, right? So I think this is somewhere at 2014, and this big news comes out that paid search is just a Google text and doesn't do anything for you. You were around when that happened. So what is that based on? A very good piece of research. I think it was published in Econometrica, where a bunch of modelers that I really like basically calculated for eBay with marketing mix modeling, or sophisticated version of that one, that paid search and the millions they paid to Google didn't give them any new customers significantly. So the proposal was just shut it off and see what happens, and they did that. So
Yeah.
in an actual field experiment, eBay just quit it, and so they lost almost no customers.
Uh-huh.
And so the big news on the internet was like, everybody should stop paid search, and I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, eBay is a very well-known company that mostly sells products, right? We call that search goods. You can easily evaluate them. So of course, they can, if you as a consumer, why did you happen to click on Google Ads for eBay? Because you were too lazy
Yeah,
to
yeah,
look
yeah.
at the
Yeah.
organic search, right? So you would click on the ad, but you would have gone to eBay anyway. Whereas for lots of the smaller companies I work with a company, for instance, that sold office furniture. And office furniture is so fascinating because it's business to business, and they try to keep a brand up, but nobody cares about any of their marketing until they need office furniture. So they were selling to offices, hospitals, government buildings, universities. And the only time a purchasing manager or a CEO of a small company pays attention is when you're expanding and you need new office furniture. So for them, paid search was extremely effective. So if you kind of, if you type in your search engine office furniture, I bet you're not just like sipping a glass of wine in
Yeah.
the evening trying to
Yeah.
explore things, right? So we got data on companies in this 2x2 selling services and so forth, and we basically hypothesized and found that paid search could be very effective. So that is an example of a paper that I'm like, hey, this actually got me thinking, because I felt that things were overgeneralized based on one company
Yeah.
that did something and was successful.
Yeah, it's really, I love that. Like, yeah, we'll just sit down on Friday night and think about if I happen to have an office someday, I might peruse office furniture. Said no one
I was
ever.
actually, yeah.
Hey, you talked there a bit about you do work with companies. I have a list here: Amazon, Heinz, Kraft, M&S, Microsoft, Nissan, Sony, Tetra Pak, Unilever, and I'm sure tons of others that you've worked with. I'd love to just understand a bit of the work that you do with companies.
So a lot of them is with more either senior marketing managers in companies or with the finance department. That's always fun
Yeah.
to be hired by either marketing or finance. So most of my bread and butter is I would say my form of long-term marketing mix modeling. So my specialization, also the title of my thesis, is that you're contemplating a certain action, and I look at all the 4 Ps. I'm very old school, right? New products. Price changes, distribution changes, promotion, online, offline. So typically based on your past data, I'm a time series econometrician. So what is the likely ROI of the decision that you're contemplating? And so for that, I typically include also how have your competitors reacted in the past. And then what companies basically get out of this one is basically how big should my marketing budget be in a certain region, and how should I allocate it? So I tend to work at the more strategic level. I tend to, use aggregate of consumer segments, right? Instead of the individual level kind
Yeah.
of cookie tracking data. And so most of my work is in that kind of environment. I do several individual level analysis also, and I typically do that based on big events, like there's a price war,
Right.
and we're like, hey, we have this wonderful set of individual shoppers, and interesting, yes, they shop around a lot more. And then ultimately what happens there. So I like to also be attracted to kind of these big policy changes or regulatory changes, that you can really have a before and after, and analyze that thoroughly.
And when you're in some of that work, without giving away, specific answers, but generally, like when outcomes of how budgets are being allocated, what are you seeing now?
Well, the struggle is always short term versus long term, right? So I think a very big current discussion is incrementality.
Yeah.
And so, and there's an interesting trade off, right? So specifically, if you can target your marketing very precisely, and you target your market mostly at people who then click on your ad, the problem is a lot of these people would have bought you anyway. So even though your short term kind of click through and so forth shows you a fantastic ROI, If it's not incremental, if these people would have bought you anyway, then that is not what you should optimally spend your money on. So I see a lot of interest, and this is very complicated to kind of
Yeah,
figure
yeah, yeah.
out,
You're
right?
definitely
In
simplifying
seeing,
it.
okay, so going back, so why is this such a big problem online? Because of self-selection. So the reason that I show you, Conor, a digital ad on the website that you browse to is, first of all, you browse to that particular website, and based on your website history, or as much as I can ethically and legally follow, I have been bidding on you, that happened in microseconds, that you're probably a high value customer for me. How did you show you were a high value customer? You were maybe checking out the category or my brand before. So you have self-selected as somebody who's extremely likely to be interested and probably buy my brand.
Mm,
Now, this is all fine if you needed the extra push or whatever I put in the ad, the price promotion, to buy it. But if you would have bought anyway, then I would rather target people who are still on the fence.
yeah.
And so I think, by the way, and I don't think we have solved this in the next 10, 20, or 30 years, because every year we have new marketing actions that we have to incorporate. But so I see a lot of kind of discussion on incrementality. And yes, a person saw my ad and bought, but is it really because of the ad? Or a person saw my ad, didn't click on it, but bought my product 2 days later.
Yeah.
Did my ad contribute to that or not? And that's just a fascinating and important challenge to figure.
You are listening to That's What I Call Marketing. I'm your host, Conor Byrne, and today's episode is brought to you by CPL Marketing Recruitment. Hugely, I spoke to Dr. Grace Kite from Magic Numbers about it. And she's got a very similar, a view on the challenge of attribution.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how often does marketing technology come up in conversations that you're having at the C-suite?
It is quite a lot, because for virtually every problem, right? I think for virtually every problem, there's three solutions. Number one, run an experiment, which is way easier for inexpensive and tactical decisions, right? Should I change a word in my ad? And a lot harder for big kind of strategic decisions. Number two, use your historical data and the variation in there to figure out what's going to happen. And number three is always a marketing technology solution. So for instance, right, I'm doing some work with LiftLab right now. And so we were on a podcast, and I was just meeting them, and the chief communication officer, like, well, thanks to your podcast, you were responsible for 70% of our traffic to our website this week. And I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. But how did you know? She's like, everybody got a different QR code, right? And we could track. And I think there's a lot of things to say about that one. So you can perfectly respect consumers' privacy, but have very specific ways that they come to your website and do things there, so that you can track with good marketing technology exactly how they came and what they did before. And so I think that just in terms of attribution, right, that
Yeah.
marketing technology is extremely helpful, and it's also very hard to argue with, and so provides you very concrete evidence, and can support other forms of information.
And in terms of then kind of even customer service, but kind of customer experience, is it coming up there? Because again, more marketers are being asked to be maybe chief customer officer or whatever. If they change the name, it doesn't really matter. But is that becoming an interesting part for you to see?
It is, and so I've done a lot of work recently on how specific consumers trade off privacy, price, and convenience online. And so you have that, right? So the nice thing of once a consumer becomes your customer, you have a lot more permission, and you have a lot of data on them. And so you can really try to figure out, how can I use marketing technology to personalize the experience more. And so and you see that, right? I mean, who responds to your emails, who does certain things. One of my big pet peeves is right now, and I have that with social media companies, right? So I'm a big Facebook fan. I'm also, I guess, that's a good idea. I have professional pages on there, and to me, kind of, so Facebook is free to me, right? And it's worth about $200 per month. I have calculated for myself. But I'm also so active, and I get so many people to reveal their preferences. I have calculated that Facebook gets around $400 per month out of me. So I feel underpaid. So I say to Facebook, hey, let's split the difference. If you pay me $100 a month, I will keep up my engagement with you. Otherwise, I will drop you, right? Because I know plenty of good alternatives. So what I personally want to do is I want to get paid for the value I create with my data. and companies are completely not set up of that trend, right? And so what I kind of also like is that I don't care much about my privacy, so I love personalized ads. I know that lots of people are against it. And so also, why do I give a retailer like Amazon all of my data? Because I want a one-click checkout, right? I want a
Oh yeah.
convenience. And so right now most of the research have dealt with privacy and price, right? So if you either use YouTube for free, but they sell all your data, right? Or you pay $15 a month and they don't, very few people choose for the latter.
Yeah.
So economists, which are all about reveal preferences, what you do say, look, consumers may say they care about privacy, but they don't care about privacy at all. They're not even willing to pay $15 a month for it. And so I think that the answer is much more nuanced, right? So I'm working on research to say, hey, there are different segments of how much people care for privacy, for price, for convenience. And these segments likely differ by country, right? So, Europe, Australia, and the US may have very different ways. So I want to help companies to kind of get the insight to offer much more specialized plans to us that we can choose ourselves, what happens with our
Yeah.
data and how much we are willing to have ads personalized.
It's really interesting. And I remember, and it's really anecdotal, but I remember doing work in Germany, and we were struggling to get people to upload details, and the German team were like, there's a lot of historical context here that you need to think about privacy. And it's really interesting. Again, it was really anecdotal. We didn't have any hard data on it, but it is interesting, those country level differences.
Yeah. I will also say, so I get called in a lot, because I'm so used to work with anonymized data. And so this was the years and years ago. This was when the internet was coming up, and companies like General Motors, right, car companies, were having these websites that you could construct your dream car. And then at the very end, they say, hey, can we then, send your email to the dealer in your area? And 99.9% of the people said no, even in the early days, right? And they're like, oh my God, we can't do anything with this data. And I'm like, are you crazy? Before people log in, they had to give their zip code. And we correlated the dream cars that they made with, then 2 months later, what types of cars were sold at the dealer lots, and it was a fantastic correlation. So I'm like, even if most people don't give you their personal data at the end, they give you their zip code, and there was a lot of kind of benefit to the company in predicting which cars to send to which dealer lots. And so there's always something. I always have a plan B, right? I'm like, yes, I would love consumers to give me all the data, but what happens if it doesn't? So for instance, at Amazon, there's a big thing about lookalike audiences, right?
Yeah.
So some people, for instance, tell Amazon they're about to move. And so absolutely fantastic, and they want personalized ads, and Amazon has figured out that like 2 months before you move, you're more likely interested in these categories, 1 month on your move, and so forth, right? Now, this is just a minority, of course, of people who are actually moving, but we have all of their behavior on Amazon, and we have the behavior of millions of other consumers on Amazon. So we can correlate what the group does in other stuff, right? That said they were going to move with the whole population, and say, hey, these millions of other consumers in their other purchases behave as if they're going to move. So if you as an advertising, for instance, want to sell new, carrier plans, and basically there's lots of kind of research that shows that people are more likely to switch carriers when they're moving, right?
Yeah.
It's right after the move, typically. This may be a wonderful full audience. So it's anonymized, and it's based on very few people actually giving you the information. But you can kind of, in both the interest of the consumer showing relevant ad, and in the interest of the company, get much more specific to say.
That's so I'm fascinated by that. I did want, because you've kind of touched on it there. You've touched on the companies, and you've touched on some of the work that you do. But I did hear you say that marketers don't use academics and academia enough to help solve their problems. And I was like, I have to hear more about your perspective on this.
So from the moment kind of I came into even a PhD, right? I mean, I'm very intellectually curious about everything, and so I right away kind of limited my list of topics based on what companies told me. So in the US we have the Marketing Science Institute here. So every 2 years they pull their hundreds of members companies about, hey, what would you want academic researchers to analyze? It's a very nice thing, kind of, that updates. So I was always interested in that one, and then from the moment I graduated, I wanted to consult kind of senior managers in big companies, and I was interested in that one. And so I've always been concerned about this gap between academia and practice. And so, and as a typical kind of, person, I blame myself, right? Or I blame my kind of group of academics. And I'm like, yes, our journals are too boring, they're too long. We don't have the blogs, we don't have the podcasts, right? Later on, we don't have the newsletters. We don't have the kind of, getting on a podium on Cannes and having a kind of a TEDx kind of version of what we
Yeah.
do. And so I think my frustration has been is that we have now all of that, and there is no evidence that there's a bridging of the gap. I think the two things that's also a competitive advantage of an academic as a consultant, right? Number one is that we tend to not sell old wine in new bags. We know what has happened in marketing for the last 60 years. I kid you not. And so we recognize patterns that come back, and we don't say every year, oh, everything is completely different,
Yeah.
or this generation is completely different than the previous one. We tend to see more similarities. And I think that's very helpful because managers tend to focus on differences, academics tend to focus on similarities. And I think that is very complementary. The other thing is also that I always say, look, I come in your company to solve your problem and get the hell out. So I don't come in a company and try to create more problems because my paycheck will stop.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have
yeah.
I have other things to do, and so and that's kind of the other benefit. But I think I mean the gap is partly due to different incentives and different timelines. But I think also because I think marketing has become way too specialized nowadays. So I can understand that you say, hey, within being a marketer, I'm particularly good at a specific channel, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm a digital marketer. But I think everybody should at least have some kind of knowledge, and you could call that very old school, but have some knowledge of the four P's of what the company's finance department thinks marketing should have as goals. And I think that marketing has become so specialized sometimes that people don't take the time to appreciate it overall, and also are now in companies where they don't necessarily pick that up from a senior colleague. And I think that's a pity.
And do you think, because you talked about, like, academics understand the 60-year history, do you feel that marketers today don't understand the history of marketing? Because sometimes some of the beliefs we have as marketers,
Yeah,
come from, old, like sales, you
yeah.
know, theories, or do you know what I mean? And they've kind of stayed through time. Paul Feldwick's books are all about that, about kind of understanding the history of marketing.
So I would say yes, things are changing, but you have to know the past benchmark to appreciate the change. I
Yeah.
always say, right? So a very typical thing is price elasticity, right? If you drop your price by 10%, by how much do your sales increase, right? So we have had hundreds of academic studies to show that it's 25% on average, and there's differences between continents and so forth, right? But so on average, if you drop your price with 10%, your sales will increase by 25%. It's important to know that. And it's important to then, for your market, it may be different, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting if you don't have the data to use as a benchmark. So I feel virtually nobody in marketing knows this simple kind of thing, right? And so there are these interesting benchmarks. So the other thing I always say, and this may be a dirty word on a marketing podcast. So I always say to people, look, advertising is a weak force, right? So compare with the price elasticity, kind of, if you double your ad budget for a known product, guess how much your sales will increase? I don't know if you have a guesstimate of that one. You double the advertising budget, you don't change your message, right? You don't change the channel, and the product is not a completely new product.
You
Do you
see,
have any idea?
no, I don't, and I don't imagine it's by much.
It's not much, right? So you double the ad budget, 100% increase. It's just 5 to 10%.
Yeah, yeah,
And so here is what that says. Suppose that you come to me as a marketer, and it's, let's say, for Tide, right? It's very much known product, or or love, and you say to me, I have this fantastic ad campaign that will increase your sales by 70%. I won't tell you it's impossible. I will say, wow, this is 7 times more than what hundreds of studies in categories like detergents have shown. How can you convince me that your campaign is really 7 times better? So, I mean, again, I'm not stopping innovation, right? And I would love for your campaign to be 7 times better, because that also, by the way, means, according to optimal marketing followers, we should spend 7 times the money on it. So it gets you money. But it's good for me to know the benchmark. By the way, when I talk to finance people or people who don't believe in marketing and they hear advertising as a weak force and
Yeah.
they say, "Oh, we can cut spending," I'm like, you know what else is a weak force in physical science is gravity, and gravity is really important. So I'm a big believer in advertising. I'm a big believer in marketing, but we have to be kind of realistic in what we can achieve and what we promise, and then we get more credibility also in the boardroom, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting because I mean, advertising as a weak force would definitely, it's a headline, and the people feel like, oh my god, oh god, and we may call that
Yeah.
the name of this episode, but
Yes. At least you get people to subscribe. Yeah.
but it must be is it at a certain level? Like, does it not have to be kind of a certain base level of spend that then the incrementality of increasing that doesn't have the impact, right?
So that's a really, really good point. So I always advise companies to have a maintenance and a peak budget, right? And so here is what I mean. You kind of, it's the same thing with me taking over for a journal. I think if you take over marketing for a company that's doing pretty well, your key objective is do no harm, don't mess things up, maintain the brand equity, maintain the sales. And that's really hard because the forces of gravity and erosion, right? No
Yeah.
matter what analog you want to use, on average, if you're a big brand, you will go down. And so you maintaining both sales and brand equity and goodwill actually should be rewarded. It's very hard to show that though with hard data. So a lot of people tell me, hey, I'm going to do something, show me with your econometric modeling, then we're going to get this much more sales. And that's just a lot easier to achieve, I always say, if consumers still have a lot to learn. So
Yeah.
if you're a newer brand that most people don't know about, but your core fans are so enthusiastic that they will help you spread the word, right? And so you can really kind of leverage your advertising that way. Or if people have a technology change, they're uncertain, and you can tell them something new, I think these are the places that advertising is extremely effective. But yes, so I always kind of look for the peak kind of season, where advertising, so a great kind of time to advertise is when you are objectively better than your competition. Suppose you're engaged in a high technology product and people come out with new products all the time, and for a 3-month window before your competitor comes out, you're objectively better. And like Consumer Reports and so also said that, Amazon reviews say that. That's when you should
Yeah.
advertise, right? Because that's where your advertising will have more effect. Advertiser can, bring the horse to water, but not make them drink. And I have that one. Or if you have a very seasonal product, right? So it doesn't really make sense to advertise the hell out of your ice cream in the cold season.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you probably want to peak that. You may want to lead up to the warm season by starting like 3 weeks before to get more kind of mental availability, right? And when your competitors are not advertising yet, but there are times that you have this peak advertising, and the rest of the year maintenance advertising. And what I find fascinating about that one, my advice is always that it depends. To what extent the virtuous circle of people buying, consuming, and talking about your product continues without you, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so give you two examples: beer and cars, right? So, if you're selling a beer that is pretty popular, I've shown in research in the US, you can actually afford to stop advertising for 6 months. And the reason is that people drink it in pubs, talk about it, and they constantly have it. So of course, we have our metrics in place, and if it goes under it, we're advertising it. But if you're selling cars, right? So people have a very short list of the cars they will test drive, typically only like 3. So and they're only they're in the market for a car for maybe a month. So if you wouldn't advertise for 6 months as a car brand, you have the risk of losing so many people that won't be in the market for another 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So here the whole thing about word of mouth is a lot less self-sustaining. So you have to spend more money on the maintenance budget.
Of course, Elon Musk doesn't believe that at all.
and you see what how Tesla has been doing lately, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so funny because actually last year I betted against this company, and then I bought an electric vehicle. I kid you not, I went to 12 dealers before I finally went to Tesla, and I bought myself a Tesla. And I absolutely love the car. I mean, it's like being in my first car. It's an absolute delight. And I was like, dude, if you would have advertised earlier, you would have put me in the car much earlier. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that some of the decisions now, but I think the product I absolutely love.
Yeah, it is a good product. Um, I'd love to kind of talk again. I touched about earlier on about kind of maybe smaller organizations and brands that may not have access to, well, certainly someone like you, but even some of the tools that are out there to
Yeah,
do some of the analytics, some of the measurements, some of the analysis. Even I talked to Grace about econometric modeling. Like
yeah,
it's hard to access that when you're maybe a smaller brand. What would your advice
true.
be to people who are kind of like, I want to do this stuff, but I don't have the resources to call someone in?
Yeah. So I would say two things, right? So I like the lean startup methodology. I have some papers about that too, which is really saying, hey, for me to succeed with whatever idea I have, right, or to grow a lot, if that's your objective, like what really needs to happen, and what are some assumptions I maybe can text, right? So the stereotypical example is Zappos. So Zappos had this crazy idea to sell shoes online. Yeah, it's a while ago,
Yeah,
and so and so the guy, instead of kind of building the whole operations and supply chain, said, let me just test it, let's make a website, let's have shoes. And then he had no shoes, so when people clicked and says yes I want it, he had to go to his competitors to buy the shoe and pay a lot of money to ship it. But he wanted to test his hypothesis that people would be comfortable buying shoes online. And so I think you can do such experiments on a relatively small scale. The second thing I would say is that I think it's even more important for small companies to listen to academics in the following sense. If you're a big company with a big history, yes. So you can give your past data to me or to Grace Kite, and we can do fancy modeling, to come up with for your company, what happens if you change price or have more advertising and so forth. But there's also lots of publicly available research out there that shows you certain benchmarks. So let's say you can say in your category, it's not for my particular product and brand, but in my category, kind of, what is one of the examples? Let's say unaided awareness or aided awareness is the most important. You can get to such kind of industry
mm,
benchmarks, right? So this is the typical thing. So unaided awareness is that I ask you a category and I ask what comes to mind, right? Now, when is it important to be in that set? When people make up their mind which brand they're going to buy, typically before going to the dealer. Then you have to score high. So, as a small brand, if that's your category, you have to try to get into that set. Most kind of fast-moving goods consumer goods categories are not like
yeah,
that. They're aided awareness, which means that if I make my new Powell's chewing gum, I don't have to come up in the top 3 or 5 when I ask you. But when you go to the retailer and you see the stimuli and you see my Powell's chewing gum, I have to kind of trigger some memory that, oh yeah,
yeah,
this is a reasonable brand, or so some ad. So that's aided awareness. And so if that's the case, I should focus much more on being at the retailer. I should focus much more on push marketing and convincing the retailers to carry me versus trying to create the pull marketing of having the consumer come to me. So there's some things you can figure out about your category. That is, by the way, it's very unlikely to change. This comes to change and thing. So human behavior is very fundamental. So how consumers kind of approach your category, it's extremely hard and extremely slow to
yeah,
change. And so, as a small brand, you have limited resources. You typically want to learn the rules of your category and play within them, and then put your limited chips on the bets that you can really break through.
yeah. That's great advice, because it's like, yeah, the 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 data across the category is out there. You can find it.
Yeah.
There's research. There's papers that requires probably a bit of digging, maybe to go find it, but it's there.
So the other advice I would give, and this was a fascinating research that I did for a company, I won't name it, but we were interested in like how do marketers get their advice.
Yeah, right.
So we were fascinated by that one because, and this goes to academics and let me call it non-academic marketing gurus, right? And I had expected that most marketers, especially for small companies, listen to the so-called gurus online, right? And we all know who they are. And I would say, positively surprised, right? That shows you what I think about gurus. That virtually nobody did. It was really interesting. What they got their advice from was other marketers, very often in exactly the same category and sometimes in adjacent categories. So in a lot of categories that we looked at, for instance, this is about digital advertising, right? They had these little Discord or other social media chats. And if we were competitors, we would still be there, but we would be under synonyms, by the way.
Yeah.
And so we would say things like, "Oh, this big tech company, promotes this new ad product. What is your experience with that one?" And then people would say, "Oh, yes, it's great ROI for the first 3 weeks, and then not anymore." So the kind of things you could never get from the big tech company themselves, and the kind of stuff that it would be pretty expensive for you to try and fail. But so they're learning from each other's mistakes. And so to the extent you can set this up, and it could be online and pretty anonymous, or you can just meet each other at conferences and so forth. And I see a lot of kind of small business marketers just exchanging notes with each other, and that works beautifully.
Yeah, it does. And actually, I think kind of it's gone past the days of, I think, people, holding the information to themselves. There's a lot more willingness to share, information, which is a good thing.
Yeah, that is true, and yes, you're right. I'm very happy with that. I mean, there's some, of course, secret sauce that you shouldn't give away, but if you think about kind of all of the ways you can spend your money, right, and what people in at least in similar categories can tell you about, does it really work for your kind of product, is something that you can almost never get from the publisher
Yeah.
that you have to give the money to, but you will much more easily get from other folks. Yeah.
Can I ask you? We're coming close to time, but as a as a professor of marketing and working with marketing students, what what are you seeing as kind of the skills that they're needing going out into the marketing world?
Yeah. So I would say a lot of study of human behaviors. As I said, the mortal sin is to assume your customers are like you,
Yeah.
and that has so many dimensions, right? I think, and this is one of the other good things about Ehrenberg Boss, right? They really stress the fact that most consumers just don't care about your
Yeah.
brand. They don't even care about your category. Whereas as a marketer, this is what you're paid for, right? You live your brand. And understanding that it's very much an attention economy, and that you first have to get onto their radar screen, and then you have permission to talk about why your product is better than the competition. I think that's a very important lesson. I think kind of the second thing is kind of really understanding how to integrate technology and which technology. So even though marketing keeps me young, I always say, right, and teaching young students keeps me young, I'm known as a bit of a technology skeptic. So in 2022, where the metaverse was everything,
Yeah.
I'm like, are you kidding me? No, it won't realize in like 5 years, like the book I was reading said. It will be more than 20 years. And for most companies, this is just not worth. I mean, so in Amazon, we're always, or we used to be advised to think big, right? So in one of our discussions, then somebody proposed that we should get into the metaverse. And I'm like, this is the worst idea ever, right? First of all, it's a fluke. Number two, as a company, we don't have any unique advantages or any special resources to get in there, right? Now with AI they have, so that's great. But I was like, this is just a bad idea for our company to put the bet on right now. And so I think every company should really realistically say, okay, there's so many new stuff coming to us. Which things do we feel that are important for our future? Typically also for the consumers in the category, and with their own strengths and weaknesses, right? Is this really something we should take the lead in, or something to just lay back and let our competitors make all the mistakes and then maybe swoop in and do something cool with it?
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't have any NFTs then?
I don't have any NFTs. I do see it as a fascinated kind of environment to study fundamental human behavior, right? So, with NFTs, I've always been interested in price, as you
Yeah.
can tell from some of the conversation. And so NFTs is just a wonderful kind of real life laboratory to see, well, what is the value of something really?
Yeah.
And we all know it's perception, right? It's in the eye of the beholder. But if there's no physical product behind it, even, then it's a more pure form to study these fundamental questions. But yes, I did not invest any of my own or any of my consultancy company money in. Yeah.
The last question for you then is just around kind of maybe, are there gaps that you see marketers have? We touched on a little bit, but in terms of maybe their focus or even their competencies.
Oh, wow. So I would say I see people, as I said, being very good tactically. So within a certain channel, within a certain ad product, even people specialize and are just very good optimizing that part. But it's always fantastic to remember what your boss and your boss's boss and the whole company really cares about. So I see very kind of often there's a focus on efficiency over effectiveness.
Right.
And that has some space, right? So for instance, for a small company, if you have almost no money and you can't reasonably borrow money at a good interest rate, you really care about the bang for your buck, and you have to go with the most efficient things, which may be things like kind of bottom of the funnel digital ads, and some things. 5 years ago it was Groupons, right, which has fallen out of favor, right? But then very soon, if you want to grow a lot, you realize that that's not enough. And then you have to compare your small channel and ad product with their specific metrics. You have to say, well, should I spend more money on this one? And then maybe diminishing returns, right? Which kind of econometric models nicely show you. So if the question is what should you spend your next dollar on, then you should think a bit broader. And so based on the ambitions of your company, you should then consider kind of spending time and money in more strategic things, right? You should say, well, besides kind of just dividing the money up, among all of, let's say, my Amazon spending or all my Google spending, should I have a digital billboard? Should I, pool money together for, a TV ad?
Yeah.
And so I think making that transition is tough if you're really kind of over focused on the short term and on your specialization in a very particular part. It also means that you're much more threatened if there's bad press about that ad product, by the way. So if you're a more general marketer says, look, this is the objective, right? Let's say the company wants to increase sales by 30%. For that, we have to, let's say, increase awareness by 50%, right? And then, I help making these calculations based on benchmark, right? You don't need the data from your company for that one. And then you're like, well, how can we increase awareness? Well, we have all of these different weapons in our tool shed as a marketer.
Yeah.
And I like this one, but if, the data shows that I have overspent on this one, or if, the publisher has completely overestimated the audiences, which sometimes happens too, you have alternatives. And you know that you're working in the best interest of your organization, and they trust you because they trust you to switch tactics when it's needed. And for that, you need a bit of a bigger perspective than just what you're specializing in day to day.
Brilliant advice. Listen, thank you so much for spending time with me today. It was an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to it so much. I never thought I'd get to speak to so many professors doing a podcast about marketing, but there you go.
Well, thank you so much for having the podcast and, for giving us a forum to do this. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of That's What I Call Marketing. If you did enjoy it, please do feel free to share it. Do feel free to rate, review, and of course, subscribe to That's What I Call Marketing wherever you are tuning in. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting Professor Pauwels. He is fascinating to have a conversation with, and actually each segment of that episode, there's so much to delve into, so much more kind of to research and kind of go back and dig into. I really, really enjoyed that episode. So I hope you did as well and got a lot out of it. And more to come in our next episode of That's What I Call Marketing, which is out next Tuesday. That's right. Every Tuesday, there's a new episode of That's What I Call Marketing. So thank you so much for tuning in. As always, it is greatly appreciated. From me, your host, Conor Byrne. Take care. Today's episode of That's What I Call Marketing was brought to you by CPL Marketing Recruitment. They are the team that have over 25 years of combined experience in recruiting and marketing, really going out of their way to thoroughly understand your needs, challenges, and are going to match you with the candidates that meet those needs and challenges and embody the culture of your organization. So if you are looking for a trusted partner to help you attract, engage, and retain the finest talent today and in the future, contact marketing.recruitment@cpl.ie and see how they can help.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.